Hello, good morning, everyone. This is our next Facebook Live and our 10 Days of Awe series. Today we are talking about trust. Now, you might be wondering why I'm holding up a camel. Well, I will tell you why in a couple of minutes. Trust is our topic for today, and this has to do with a phrase that we say in Mussar. For every soul trait, we have a recitation phrase. For the phrase of trust, the one I really like is, trust in God, but tie your camel. This comes from a phrase in the Arabic, trust in Allah and tie your camel. And I'm curious what you might think of this. What does it mean to trust in God, but tie your camel? How do we bring those two things together? Well, once again, it all has to do with, wait, don't leave. Has to do with our subject for today, which is trust. Now, if you've taken part in some of these previous videos, you've noticed that I've had backwards words. So I actually had to figure out how to print backwards so I could have a nice visual to show you. In Mussar, trust is short for the phrase trust in God. Now, if you're unsure about the divinity, or unless you're from the real minority that's very serious about God and religion, this is probably a very difficult and different concept for you to understand. Some of us aren't even sure about the divinity, so why would I want to practice trust? Well, first of all, I want to say, in my perspective, in my experience, you actually don't need to believe in God to practice trust. You can think about that phrase from Mark Twain, who once said, "Some of the worst things that have ever happened to me actually took place." So what does that mean? It means he spent so much time worrying and concerned about things that he just worried about stuff that never actually happened. And occasionally something he worried about happened, but most of the time, we worry and we play these events out in our head and we're like, okay, well, first this could happen. If that happens, I'm going to say this. And, oh, well, what if, nobody shows up to my Facebook Live, and then what am I going to do? And all of this. So this idea of trust is just worrying that most of the things, is understanding that most things that we worry about never actually take place. So that by practicing trust, we can just kind of let go of that a little bit. We can understand that, no matter what happens, I'm going to be able to deal with it. So this is a difficult concept, though. And a lot of Mussar masters and a lot of Mussar practitioners just skip it entirely. They say, you know what, trust is too difficult. I'm not going to work on this. This is just and I just don't get it. I've had conversations with rabbis who've said, look, I can't just place all of my trust in God. I just can't have this blind faith that things are going to work out. And to that I answer, good, you're not supposed to have blind faith. It goes back to our friend the camel. You're supposed to trust in God, but tie your camel. It means we have to do our part too. We have to wear our seatbelt. We have to obey the speed limit. If we're just recklessly going through life, trusting that everything's going to be okay, then we're looking for trouble. I want to remind you of the spectrum of trust. And sorry, this one I didn't print backwards, so look at the event or look in my book to see this. But the idea is that having too much trust is as bad as having not enough. So if we have too much trust, we can be reckless. We can not take responsibility for our actions. But if we have too little trust, we live in fear. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This is, how can trust be a cure for fear? The reasons why, and this is one of the 3 reasons why I think it is important to try to practice trust to some degree. As you may know, in Mussar, we focus on one soul trait for 2 weeks at a time. It's what my friend and student Adam calls extreme spiritual fitness. We're not trying to change all the soul at once. We can't do everything. We can't change everything at the same time, because if we're Our life is a car driving 100 miles an hour, and if suddenly we slam on the brakes and we try to whip into a turn, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. Life doesn't work that way. When we want to change, we need to slowly make changes. So if we start to practice trust, it can help us overcome fear. And the more out of balance you are, the more benefits you're going to see. So if you've never practiced this, if you're a huge worrier, just even trying a little bit of trust, just trying a tiny little bit is going to make a big difference. Are you with me so far? Give me some likes if you're following along. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, another reason why it's good to start practicing trust a little bit is just because it's hard. It's really hard, and so if it's hard, you need practice. A couple days ago in one of these sessions, we looked at the reading to say that, you don't learn to become you don't learn to make shoes by reading a book. You have to practice it. You don't learn to become an engineer by just thinking about it. You have to actually do some engineering. You can't program a computer. You can't learn to do that without actually getting behind the keyboard and doing some code. And so it's to our benefit to learn how to do this practice. Okay, so how is it that this can help? Well, in the first Mussar book, Duties of the Heart, by Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda, a book written 1,000 years ago, he wrote that one who trusts in God neither worries nor laments. So the idea is that that's predicated on this idea that your vision of the divinity is as someone it's a benevolent divinity. It's that there is a plan for everything, that most things work out, and even some really hard and difficult things that happen have a silver lining to them. I mean, sometimes tough things really do happen. A friend of mine, he went home one day, found his wife in bed with somebody else. You might suddenly be going along and think you're in a happy marriage, and then one day your husband shows up and says, "Sorry, I'm leaving you for somebody else." You may have unspeakable tragedy visit your life, like the death of a child. I mean, is there anything that's worse than that? Whether it's an adult child, and in our latest Torah portion, there's this phrase, "God will circumcise the foreskin of your heart." And what that's talking about is sometimes just these awful, awful things happen. We get hit by one of these, we're in the path of a hurricane, and we lose power for days, and our home is destroyed by a flood, and our pets get killed, and our neighbor gets killed, and our life is completely disrupted. So, we might, if we start to engage with the divine, then we might say to ourselves, well, what did I do to deserve this? Well, the answer is you didn't do anything to deserve it. This wasn't targeted at you personally. And if we live our life in fear that some disaster might visit us, then that takes away from every moment of our life as we're going along. So if we can bring ourselves into a mindset of trust, we can understand that no matter what happens, there's an opportunity for good to come out of it. Many people who find that they're laid off from their job, at the time it's a horrible setback. But over time, it turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to them. They go and they get a better job, or they actually like their boss this time. They feel energized and engaged. Or it makes them say, geez, I put all of myself into this job. I was so afraid that I was going to get laid off, and I just worked and worked and worked like crazy to prevent this layoff from happening. And what happened? I got laid off anyway. So maybe it's time for me to re-examine my life and my priorities. And I'm never going to put so much into my job again. I'm going to trust in the universe that, I can afford to spend some time with my family. I'm going to allow myself to stop working at night, and I'm going to trust that things are going to work out and that nothing's going to happen. Um, Nothing's going to happen between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. And I can just stay off my work email during that period. And if there's a real emergency, somebody will call me. But how often does an emergency happen? Not very often. So we need to just trust that things will take care of themselves. Now, there's a saying in Proverbs, which is that the wicked flee though none pursue, but the righteous are confident, trusting as a young lion. And so this is one of these phrases in Scripture that can be a little bit challenging for us. We can get a little bit hung up on, well, does that mean that if I'm worried that I'm wicked? Does that mean that somehow if I do the right thing, nothing's going to happen? It doesn't necessarily mean that. But here's the question. Which are you? Are you wicked or righteous? And one of my friends and study partners, he's retired now, but when he was doing mediation, he used to ask people, do you like yourself? And he asked me, Greg, do you like yourself? And I was like, ooh. It was like a pit in my stomach. And I said, maybe I don't like myself so much. As a matter of fact, I know that's the case because, as I've talked about here before, sometimes I feel really worthless, despite my PhD from MIT and my book sales and my great relationships. Sometimes I just don't feel good about myself. And so that has me looking over my shoulder a little bit. Suddenly I am sort of fleeing for things, and I'm acting as if I'm wicked. That's a state of mind. That's a state of mind. Understanding, really I am enough and I am okay, that God has my back and God is going to be here with me no matter what happens. Now, if you're unsure about the divinity, think about it in terms of the divine that exists within other people, that common spark of humanity. I told this phrase to a Mussar friend of mine, God's always there to hold your hand. And she related how she was in a hospital in a foreign city and she had to get an MRI on her head, and she had an anxiety attack. And they had to pull her out of the tube, and they said, what do you need? She says, I need you to hold my hand. And so the social worker just sat and held her hand, and she started to feel better. There's always someone there that can do that for you. And if we can get into this mindset of trust, we can start to overcome some of these fears. Now, Rabbi Yosef Yozel Hurwitz, the Alter Navardak, he was one of Rabbi Israel Salanter's 3 disciples. He said that there are, he pointed out, and rightly so, that a practice of trust should be individualized. So if you're like someone who's a little bit comfortable with this, if you're comfortable that there's something more, that there's something greater, that there is maybe a divine presence or benevolence out there, trusting that things are going to work out might be easier for you. So you would be in a position to start to take on your most challenging situation, whatever that might be. I'm going to start with the hardest thing. Yeah, I'm going through a divorce. I'm just going to practice trust that things are going to work out. Now, it doesn't take away the pain of the moment, but it does give us some energy to move forward, that somehow, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to come through this a better person. I don't often talk about my childhood, and there were a lot of difficult things that happened, but one thing my dad always said to me is, Greg, you're going to be a better person for all of this. And even though, times were kind of tough, I could hold on to that a little bit to say, okay, something good is going to come out of this. But many people aren't really in a place to start with the hardest thing. And if you're in that situation, and I think most people are, the best place to start to practice trust is on something that's easy. And you could be, one thing that we can do, and this might surprise you to have me suggest this, is actually to try a little bit of prayer. But don't pray for a better job, try for something really simple. And I was reading my journal in preparation for this, and the first time I tried this practice, I had this book called The Black Swan. I couldn't find it anywhere. I was looking all over the house. I was really frustrated. I needed it as a reference for a blog post that I was writing, and I was held up for a couple of weeks because I could not find a copy of this book. So I said, okay. So I closed my eyes, and I very sincerely prayed to find the book. And wouldn't you know, and then I went and started to look for it, and I found it almost immediately. Was this divine intervention? Or was it just taking a moment to calm myself, to trust myself that, you know what, the book is there. And for whatever reason, I was able to let go of all the frustration and self-criticism and beating myself up. And geez, you're supposed to be on top of this and you're a writer and you can't even find this book. All that just stripped away because I went into a mindset of trust. And all of the fears I had about what happens if I don't write this blog post, those just fell away as well. So I tried it a couple of other times. I prayed to find a good parking spot. I found a good parking spot. I was having writer's block. I prayed to get rid of my writer's block. It helped me with that. And of course, my favorite prayer, my very favorite prayer, is God help me get through the next 5 minutes. Now, I have teenage daughters. I use that one a lot. Sometimes some drama happens. They're great girls. They're great kids. But sometimes there's just some conflict. You know, I've been married for 20 years. I have a wonderful wife. Sometimes we argue. Sometimes things happen that frustrate me. And God help me get through the next 5 minutes. Can help me trust that things are going to work out and to remain calm and centered. Another thing that I do, I may have shown this to you before, is I have this little Hamsa bracelet. I love this. It's dried acai berries. It's something I got from freetradejudaica.org. They make sure that there is good conditions for all the workers who are creating these works of art. So Hamsa is this little hand shape. And for me, it's a reminder that no matter what happens, God is always there to hold my hand, and that I'm not alone, and that I have the ability to handle any situation. And often, and I've referred to this a few times, often this idea when we're having fears, it's fear that we're not enough. So I have a Mussar practice to suggest. And it's to say the phrase, I am enough. No matter what's happening, no matter what's going on, I am enough. I don't need to rehearse over and over again. I don't need to worry about what may or may not happen in the future. Whatever happens, I am enough. I have a divine spark. I have a divinity. If I make a mistake, I'm enough. I'll be able to handle it. If something goes sideways in the meeting at work, I'm enough. I'll be able to handle it. I can ask for help. There's other people who are on my side. So that's my suggestion to you to kind of get started practicing trust. If you're feeling a lot of fear, what it really comes down to is this fear that I'm not enough. If you'd like to learn more about Mussar, please feel free to reach out to me, send me a message. Tell me what you think of this. Is this all just a bunch of BS? It's like, look, this is some mumbo jumbo. You know, at this time of year, in the days of awe, this is one time where we can maybe open ourselves up a little bit to exploring our life, exploring the divine, exploring some of our assumptions. So please send me a message. Tell me what you think about this. Tell me how it might interact with your life and how you show up. And I promise I will answer every message right away. Have a wonderful day and week. And once again, have a very happy new year.